When you are treating the pedophilia of children and the mistreatment of children, abuse of children as a political football in order to protect your guy, I would suggest that you're the evil one in the scenario.
Today's video will be looking at Ben Shapiro's appearance on Fox News, which is titled on his official channel, Shapiro slams spin on church child abuse. Let's get started.
Ben Shapiro is editor-in-chief of DailyWire.com. Ben, good to see you tonight. Thank you for being here. You wrote about this. You talked about it on your podcast today. What do you see as the hypocrisy in the coverage on this story?
I mean, it's pretty astonishing. So several years ago, obviously, when the media started to delve into all of the sex abuse allegations against the Catholic Church, there was a great deal of enthusiasm, I think rightly so, in the press for investigating all of that. But now that Pope Francis is at the head of the church, and they like Pope Francis more than they like Pope Benedict in the left-wing press, suddenly they have to rush to Pope Francis's defense over these allegations. So the New York Times ran one of the worst headlines I've ever seen today, talking about how as the allegations against Pope Francis mount, conservatives pounce. Conservatives, how's conservatives pouncing on sex abuse allegations?
Let's put it up on the screen. Go ahead, Ben. I just want to put it on the screen for everybody to see that. There it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing accusation that the story is not actually serious allegations levied at the head of the Catholic Church by other lead members of the Catholic Church over a cover-up of sex abuse of children. Now, the real story is that conservatives might use this to go get an icon for the political left. It just demonstrates that for the left, it does make you wonder whether it's an actual priority to protect children or whether the higher priority is to protect the politics that they see as imperative.
First things first. What the Catholic Church has actively done in protecting child rapists to the extent of moving them from place to place and harbouring them to avoid prosecution is vile. Equally vile is Pope Francis' various statements on the matter, which aren't being followed immediately by any sort of action to tackle the problems head on. I'm not here to defend the Judeo-Christian value system and the abuses inherent within its doctrine dating back to the Devarim and the Bamidbar, and I'll get to those later. What I'm doing here is investigating Ben Shapiro's take on the whole situation. Now, Ben is referring to what the leftist media is apparently doing as spin, but I want to take the go-to example both Ben and Faux News used just now to see what the headline about conservatives pouncing was about. What exactly was Jason Horowitz referring to when they used the word pouncing? Ben seems to be giving the impression that this is part of some unified defense of Francis, when in actuality it's Horowitz calling out attempts to shift the blame off of the church and onto gay people. Various clergy members are claiming that said abuses have only occurred due to a homosexual presence in the Vatican invited in by Francis. Of course, this completely ignores the reality of how said abuses are not something new. The media did not start talking about it several years ago as Ben Shapiro asserted. Maybe the conservative right-wing media did, maybe that's why Ben thinks this, but not the rest of media. They started talking about it decades ago, long before Pope Francis came to power. But the religious so rarely care for the facts when they can weaponize trauma they inflicted to forward their agenda against non-heterosexual people. That was the pouncing the article discussed at various points. Now, Francis is clearly not doing enough, and it would be good journalism to mention how many of the victims feel the watery apologies and the calls to prayer are not enough to handle the situation. And wouldn't you know, Jason Horowitz, the author of the article they displayed on screen, did just that. The article reads, quote, "Some abuse survivors who have been pressing Pope Francis to take concrete action about the crisis instead of just offering apologies, however heartfelt, argue that Archbishop Vigano's letter exploited the abuse for political gain. The letter did not, they say, show particular concern about the plight of the Church's children." End quote. Later on, the article went on to add, quote, "The homosexual network present in the Catholic Church must be eradicated," Archbishop Vigano wrote, arguing that it was the root cause of the abuse. End quote. The article also added, quote, "At the Conference of Catholic Families, a rival conservative event to the Vatican's World Meeting of Families in Dublin this past weekend, organisers found the Pope's recent condemnation of abuse unsatisfactory because he did not call out homosexuality. That, they say, has turned seminaries into cesspits." End quote. Now, Vigano later returned in the article with, quote, The report remains a closely held Vatican secret, but in his letter, Archbishop Vigano included a slew of names and targeted allies of Francis who share the Pope's views. He said Cardinal Blaise J. Cupic of Chicago was blinded by his pro-gay ideology, and he took issue with the assertion of Cardinal Cupic, a past president of the Committee on Protection of Children and Young People. End quote. Now, what did Cardinal Cupic say? Well, they stated, quote, that the main problem in the crisis of sexual abuse by clergy is not homosexuality, and that affirming this is only a way of diverting attention from the real problem, which is clericalism. End quote. Then the article went on to add, quote, in an interview on Sunday, Cardinal Cupic said, I think it's wrong to scapegoat gays and homosexuals as though there is a greater likelihood that gay people are going to offend children than straight people. That data doesn't bear out. End quote. So in claiming that the left is doing everything to spin said child abuse to protect Francis, your go-to example is an article that first of all notes how various victims feel betrayed by Francis's complete lack of action, as well as gives voices to those challenging attempts by clergy to derail the conversation and absolve the church of all responsibility. That is your go-to example. It would appear that the accusation of spin coming from you is little more than a simple projection of your own attempts. The article noted the fact that in 2005, the Vatican made very clear that anyone who was even thought to have supported homosexuality was to have their application rejected outright, decades after the abuses had already begun, and at least a decade after mainstream media started to pay attention. That's not bias or spin, that's called reporting. But I'm not exactly surprised you, Ben, can't recognise what reporting actually looks like.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty unbelievable. And I just want to point out that they sort of softened, the New York Times softened that headline between the online version and the newspaper version. The original newspaper version said, Francis takes the high road as conservative Pounce, taking criticisms public. And then I want to play a bit of an interview with Cardinal Blaise Cupic, thank you, Cupic, which is also rightly getting attention for what he said in here, which could have easily just been blasted. Watch this.
The Pope has a bigger agenda. He's got to get on with other things of talking about the environment and protecting migrants and carrying on the work of the church. We're not going to go down a rabbit hole on this.
Wow, we're not going down that rabbit hole. I mean, has he seen the stories that were published about the Pennsylvania diocese and what they did to these children?
How exactly is what Cupic just said not the headline on every major paper in the United States? The only possible rationale is that a lot of members of the press actually agree that when it comes to choosing between leftist politics in the Catholic Church and protecting children, leftist politics have to take the center stage. The reality is that, can you imagine if Pope Benedict had said anything like this, 6-7 years ago when he was the head of the Catholic Church and when these allegations were in full swing against the Boston Archdiocese? Of course it would have been the end of the world. And it should be the end of the world because when people in positions of power are covering for institutional, disgusting and criminal behavior, that should be the end of the world, particularly when it's a religious institution that is tasked with presumably God's word on earth. But instead, the press, at least at the New York Times, seem deeply concerned with protecting Pope Francis from any and all comers because they like Pope Francis. And it's I've rarely seen a more disgusting example of press behavior than this. It's truly an amazing, amazing thing.
It's pretty unbelievable. And when you point out, the movie Spotlight, which got so much attention, which rightfully, as you say, put a focus on what had been happening for decades in the Boston diocese. And then, the church's defense, which really was not credible, we now know, because these things they go on a lot less than they used to, but I don't know that that's really any comfort to anybody because they shouldn't be happening at all. But it was like, it was all decades ago. But now that you're learning that Cardinal Wuerl, who's still being discussed about whether or not he should be able to maintain his position in Washington, D.C., may have known about these things, and that Pope Francis may have known about these things. The same people who were so hard on the church when Spotlight came out and when those stories came to light should be absolutely leading with these stories and asking him these hard questions and pressing people like Cupic. I mean, it's pretty unbelievable. I mean, if Jesus had any central teaching, one of them was that children are the most important to be protected. And in Matthew, he says, if you cause any of the little ones to stumble, you should have a large millstone hung around your neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea.
Indeed, the Bible is a very contradictory book. And that's something I want to discuss since Ben Shapiro is talking about the need to call out any institutionalized abuse, including child rape, in religious circles. Okay then, I expect to see Ben Shapiro abandon his Orthodox Jewish beliefs immediately. After all, Numbers in the Bible, Bamidbar in the Jewish Tanakh, details the conquest rape of young girls in chapter 31, verses 1 through 18. Reading on from verse 15 using the New International Version, because it's the combined effort of thousands of devout Christians and even Jewish scholars to create the most accurate depiction of what the scriptures originally said, reads as quote, "Have you allowed all the women to live?" he asked them. They were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and enticed the Israelites to be unfaithful to the Lord in the Peor incident, so that a plague struck the Lord's people. Now kill all the boys and kill every woman who has ever slept with a man. But save yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. End quote. When it says, but save yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man, it's not talking about warm hugs and cuddles. And we see this elaborated on in Deuteronomy, Devarim in the Tanakh. Chapter 21, verses 10 through 13, read as quote, "When you go to war against your enemies, and the Lord your God delivers them into your hands and you take captives, if you notice among the captives a beautiful woman and are attracted to her, you may take her as your wife. Bring her into your home and have her shave her head. Trim her nails and put aside the clothes she was wearing when captured. After she has lived in your house and mourned her father and mother for a full month, then you may go to her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife." End quote. Now, if you did not know this, a captive, especially a child captive, cannot consent to either marriage or sexual intercourse. Therefore, what is being described here is nothing short of an international war crime. It's the rape of young girls. All you have to do is give her a month to mourn the family you butchered in front of her. So Ben, I look forward to you abandoning your current beliefs. I don't expect you to become a non-believer, but you can't pretend to have the high ground in arguing that the Catholic Church should be held accountable for an abuse not too dissimilar to one which is permitted in your own scripture. At least not without being a massive hypocrite. Sadly, I don't think that's below you. You're an opportunist, just like the others called out by the victims in the article you're harping on about, because it had a level of nuance you could never even dream of.
Again, it's an amazing thing, and I think it goes to the fact that when it was Pope John Paul II or when it was Benedict, then the press didn't like those guys because those guys were very conservative, particularly on social issues. But because Pope Francis is, I think in his essence, a liberation theologist who believes a lot of left-wing things about climate change and redistribution of income and illegal immigration, they're going to protect him from accusations from the so-called conservative wing of the church, which after all is basically just asking the Pope to, I don't know, enforce what seems to me to be basic Catholic doctrine for the past couple of thousand years.
And one of the things that, Pope Francis said, who am I to judge when it comes to gay priests? And he was lauded for that, for sort of opening up the understanding of that. And I think one thing we have to be very, very clear on is that, to be gay is not to be a pedophile. We're talking about criminal pedophile behavior here. And I think everybody on both sides of the conservative liberal argument ought to be able to get on the same side that everybody is against criminal behavior and pedophilia, right?
When you are treating the pedophilia of children and the mistreatment of children, abuse of children as a political football in order to protect your guy, I would suggest that you're the evil one in the scenario.
And I would have to agree, which is exactly why I felt the need to make this video and call you out for doing just that. You're a hypocrite on two fronts. For a start, you don't hold your own religious convictions to the standards you're demanding from the Catholic Church. But more importantly, you're pretending like the left hasn't been up in arms over this on the basis of a deliberate misportrayal of a single headline. There's a reason newspapers don't consist of just headlines but have articles attached to them. It's because a headline is just there to catch your eye. The information of the article is supposed to inform you on the details, which is why you need to read it. It's genuinely shocking, though perhaps not so surprising, that both of you made the very same point that was the central comment of the article you are decrying as evil. The article in question laid out the events in a pretty nuanced fashion, focusing on how the clergy are trying to spare themselves scrutiny by shifting the blame to a minority demographic they already hate. And you attack someone for having the audacity to cover that for what it is. The very claim that said abuse has occurred due to homosexuality was spin, and so is your seemingly unwitting defense of said claim. A fact I can demonstrate and anyone can check for themselves by reading more than the bloody headline of the article. But of course, you have to come in and assert there's some sort of love on the left for Pope Francis. I remember seeing a couple examples of that in the first year or so after he rose to power, so around 2013/14. But it died away very quickly when others began to realise that he was just the same old shit as before, with a new model number slapped on the side. Not that Ben cares to actually report on the truth, or his fans wish to seek it and challenge him on his lack of integrity. These horrific abuses really have brought out the worst in a lot of people, and that's all I really have to say. Hi there. I'd just like to say a few things here at the end of the video before you go. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone who's ever donated to the channel via Patreon, giving a special thanks to the following people: Hannah Banghart, Matthew Kovac, John Schoenrock, Daniel Martinez, and Alexander Williams. Your support has ensured this channel's ability to grow over the years. I'd also like to ask that you comment down below and like this video, as well as subscribe, hit the bell icon, and follow Essence of Thought on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please also consider following Atheist Alliance International on Facebook, a humanist organisation dedicated to helping atheists around the globe. Any comments utilising language which insults others on the basis of perceived gender, sexuality, ethnicity or ability both mental and physical will be removed immediately, and the commenter may be blocked on the moderator's discretion. Let's work to keep this space one which upholds the values of humanism. Thank you.